I'm Benjamin Hall, and I'm searching for heroes. Hello, everyone, and thank you again for joining me on the podcast today. Today is very important. It's a very heavy day for many people. And that's because February the 24th, 2025, that day marks 3 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. In some ways, it feels like it was only yesterday that this happened, that I was sent to Ukraine to cover the war. But in other ways, it feels like it's been a lifetime, because in many ways, it has. Since my life changed so drastically on March 14th of that year, where we lost Pierre and Sasha, and I nearly lost my life. And while we take this day to honor Ukraine, a country that wasn't expected to last a month against Russia, and which continues to fight 3 years later, we must also spend this day remembering the countless innocent lives that have been lost, to pay respect to those who continue fighting for Ukraine, and also for an end to this brutal war. One of those people is Ambassador Oksana Markarova, who had only been serving as the ambassador of Ukraine to the US for about a year when Russia invaded her country. Overnight, Ambassador Markarova's work and her face were being spoken about and featured across the globe as she held the crucial responsibility of being the connecting force between Ukraine and the US. Today, Ambassador Markarova joins me to share what these past 3 years have been like for her and why she remains in awe every day of the Ukrainians who continue fighting for their country and for freedom. She's also here to speak about Victoria Amelina, an incredible woman who dedicated her life to documenting the lives of extraordinary women, like herself, who dropped everything to join in the fight against Russia. Tragically, while Victoria was working on her book, a Russian missile hit the restaurant she was in, leaving her with injuries that would ultimately kill the 37-year-old wife and mother. That book, Looking at Women, Looking at War, has now been published by her family and friends, and Ambassador Markarova speaks to me today about Victoria's life and legacy, as well as her own experience living at the heart of war in her home.
When you are not 24/7 on the news, and when the journalists, like they have been bravely, like you and your colleagues, showing literally what was going on right there through the lenses of your camera, when it's not in the houses of American people on a daily basis, people tend to think about something else. So sometimes, we know that every day Russia attacks Ukraine with missiles and Shahed drones, and there are people who die. And unfortunately, sometimes I feel like it's been normalized, which should not be normalized. But people almost say, oh, yeah, Russia again attacked Ukraine. Well, that's what happens, Well, it shouldn't happen. So I don't think people forgot, but it's all our joint responsibility to tell people, to inform people, to remind people, because what I saw here in the US, when we do this, when we get this information to American people are good, and they respond to that, and they want to do something, and they want to help, or they want to support Ukraine, or they want to support freedom, because this is what it is about. So it's not forgotten, but it's not as in focus as it should be, because it's still very relevant to all of us.
You, as the ambassador to Ukraine, that is your role. It is about reminding people, talking about your country. It's being the face to your country, perhaps, inside the US. What has that been like for you, and how's it been being an ambassador? You were ambassador before the war began, and so you have been covering it throughout. How difficult has that been?
Well, on the one hand, war started in 2014. So yes, it was not a hot war when I arrived in 2021 as an ambassador. But of course, it was always there in the background, and since 2021, when Russia started moving the troops toward the border, as you remember, we all were talking about, the need to deter Russia from attack. But of course, the experience of being an ambassador during a full-fledged war in your country is something that you can never fully prepare yourself for unless you are doing it. On the one hand, it has been a bit surreal, like every day you wake up, especially in 2022, and you think, was that a bad dream? Is this really happening? Is this a full-fledged war in the middle of Europe, in my country, every day? on the other hand, you know what you have to do, and you have to almost put aside your personal feelings and experiences, because all of us have families back home. Gorinka, where you have been hit, that's the place through which I always drove kids to school from. Vorzel, where I live, the northernmost part of Bucha, to Pushchevoditsa, where my children's school is located. So, you read the news and you know the streets. You read the names of the people who were killed, and you understand how many of them you know personally. But you have to, almost at some point, I had to separate my personal experience from being an ambassador, because you just have to keep it all together, and you have to be convincing, and you have to be focusing on facts and inform American people and talk to administration. So, I mean, it was challenging. It is still challenging. But on the other hand, this is the biggest honor and privilege, I think, to be able to help your country, whatever you can do. And I was an ambassador when the full-fledged war started. And, all I could do is to do my best in doing what I can in order to not only inform American people, but also share why it is important for American people, why it's important for all of us to stop this aggression and Putin, why it has implications not only for security, but also for prosperity of all of us. Because for the first time since World War II, a nation, a nuclear nation, a member of the Security Council of the UN, challenged international borders, international order, the rules which we all thought maybe were not perfect, but prevented wars for more than 80 years.
It's difficult in conflicts, particularly in Ukraine, perhaps, where there are moments of hope, moments where things are going in your favor, and then moments when they're not. And I don't know if it's possible to really look ahead and to start talking about a rebuild or what happens after the war when you're in the middle of a war. Do you have to... You have two separate ideas right now. You can think about the right now, right here, but is there a part of you also thinking about the hope for afterwards, and how do you balance the two?
Then these are the two sides, I think, of the same coin. On the one hand, there is horrible war in my country, and we have to inform about war crimes and horrors and rapes and tortures and everything that Russia does to destroy. On the other hand, we liberated 50% of what was taken by Russia initially. We're rebuilding right now. Kids go to school, yes, with all the challenges, with the need for shelters, with shelling and risks every day. So the story of resilience and story of rebuilding now, but it is actually goes hand in hand together with, it's horrible, but we're resilient and we can win this one. And the reconstruction after the war ends is the light at the end of the tunnel. And if we want to be successful there, if we want to win the peace, as I say, we have to work on it now. That's why you see how many discussions actually focus on reconstruction. And we work very actively with our partners, and especially with the US, on what could it be? How can we leapfrog into this new innovative Ukraine 2.0 with developed energy, with Ukraine being answer to so many global challenges, with prosperous Ukraine, which would be solution to global problems. And it's not just wishful thinking, it's not just dreams. In order to be there, we have to do a lot right now, and we work already with American business, with American administration. As you know, now we're in the process of discussing what can we do more in investing in critical areas where Ukraine can be successful. So it's from, emotional and moral standpoint, practical standpoint, and actually survivability and also resilience standpoint is a very important issue to work on now, in addition to, of course, defending the country, which is number one priority.
Yeah, resilience is such a fascinating thing in conflict, because most people think of war and they think of the horror and the tragedy and the death and the darkness. But, when you go to conflict and you see people in conflict, you see so much bravery and strength and helping others and sacrifice that people willingly do for their neighbors, for their family, for everyone around them. And it's hard to imagine the two sides, but you must have seen some incredible strength out of Ukraine that you maybe didn't see before. And I know it's difficult to talk about all the positives, but you must have been incredibly proud to see the whole country coming together. Is that the case?
Absolutely. We're talking today about Victoria's book, but there are so many women and men who inspire me every day. I wouldn't be able to do what I do here without all the stories, without them coming here or talking to me on the phone or just reading their stories. And you think, oh my God, among all that horror and damage and destruction, there is so much kindness and grace and compassion. And people who are on the front lines, and then I talk to them while they are on the front lines, and they are supporting me. They're telling me to stay strong. They're telling me that everything is going to be fine. And that, I think, is another big story and something that Ukraine can share with the world. Because, almost 3 years of full-fledged war, 11 since the war started, but 3 years of full-fledged war.
Yeah.
And while we all hear about horrible war crimes that Russia committed, not only in the areas where they occupy, but with our prisoners of war and others, you do not hear those stories about Ukraine. And it's, I'm very proud of that. It just shows that humanity has a place among all that horror, and that when you fight with evil and you are not becoming evil yourself, that's, I think, the greatest achievement of all. And we have to share those stories as well, because this is our contribution to culture. This is our contribution. I mean, there are so many artists who started painting. There are so many poets I discovered during this 3 years. There are so many people who create, with the jeweler from Kharkiv, who takes the weapons, Stanislav Drokin, the remains of the weapons and turn them into jewelry. Or Nikita Titov, again from Kharkiv and now lives in Ivano-Frankivsk, who draws this amazing art, and I can go on and on and on. So much new music and new shows and everything, and it all comes, of course, with pain, of course, with this idea to do something to help your country, to share this. But it's also beautiful. It's also creative. It also shows how much Ukraine has to share with the world, and it's worth defending it.
Yeah, because it's not only about defending your land and your people; it's about defending your culture as well. And I wonder if that's something you're fighting for as well. And you mentioned the artists and musicians. I mean, is there a fear that if this war were lost, it wouldn't just be the land, it would be far more than that? It would be your identity and culture that could be gone.
It was always more than land. I mean, look, we were never a threat to Russia. You can look at the map to realize that. And it's not like Russia lacks land or natural resources or something else. I mean, they still have vast territory to develop to the east of Moscow, and that you can go days, travel days, just to see the depths of everything that they have. It was never about that. And if you look at what they've done during this horrible 3 years, our museums and the places of cultural heritage, they were not collateral damage. They were the targets. So as of now, there are thousands already, more than 1,300 cultural heritage sites that have been either destroyed or damaged by Russians. There are hundreds of churches, Ukrainian churches, that have been damaged by Russia. What do they do first thing when they abduct our children? They tell them they're Russians. They force them to speak Russian. They force them to learn and sing Russian anthem. They put them into the speedy adoption into Russian families. So they are attacking heritage and children, attacking our past and attacking our future, and they are waging this war, literally killing Ukrainians everywhere. What is it if not a genocide based on the fact that we are Ukrainians and we only want to be Ukrainians, and they're trying to wipe it out? So for us, it's much more than about just defending our home and land, which again is very important, but it's also defending the right to be who we want to be, to live how we want to live, to worship our God, to just, again, Ukrainians are very peaceful people. If you were to ask me 15 years ago, and I would tell you that, of course we will fight if we have to, but if you ask Ukrainians what you want to do, we want to grow food, and we want to have children, and we want to sit with friends and talk around the tables. And even if you ask all of our neighbors around us, they would say, "Oh, Ukrainians, they're like kind and funny and nice people." So it is about culture, and the fact that Putin continues to lie now, he doesn't admit that he attacked us because of that. He comes up with all kind of fake reasons for that. But every time anyone pushes him to stop it, he starts bringing the culture thing. When all Ukrainians, regardless of their face, the language they speak, their ethnic background, they say, just leave us alone. We don't want to be Russians.
Yeah. And one of the main reason we agreed to talk today was because of Victoria Amelina's book. And this is an incredible woman who died while trying to cover and talk about it. And I think it's so important to talk about how strongly people felt, and she felt, in covering the conflict and writing about it, that she didn't die alone. 13 other people were killed, and many of them were writers and journalists alongside her. And so she is a perfect example of what people can do. And can you tell us how important it is for people like Victoria and for the work they've done, and what that work means not only for now, but for the future?
Well, first of all, I think the work of journalists in Ukraine, Victoria and others, and you, I can't even find words to describe how important it was. I think that's the reason that brave people like you, like people who stayed in Mariupol and others, it's the reason why we were able actually to show it to the world, and it's the reason why the world came together to help us. Without that, we would see the repetition of 2014. Russia would publicly lie that nothing happens, and it would be very difficult to convince the world. But because we had so many brave people, literally from all media stations, who rushed to Irpin, who rushed to Mariupol, who rushed to Kharkiv, who were risking their lives, and we lost more than 70 journalists since the beginning of the war, and there are also many wounded and those who suffered from this. And it has been a game changer. It has been very important, and we really appreciate the sacrifice and the devotion of so many people, not just professional journalists, but also people like Victoria. She was not really a professional journalist. She was a writer. She was, a very talented person. And she decided this is what she needs to do during the war. That's how she will help her country, to help document it, to help other journalists closer to the front line, and make them see, and through their own experience, tell the world what is going on there, to record it, to tell it to people elsewhere, But all of these people are so talented. If you read Victoria's, books, I just can't help by thinking, how much more would she write if she wasn't killed by Russians, along with other people? I mean, she was born in 1986. Every time I have this, thing in my mind, like everyone who is younger than my youngest sister, like it really hits your heart. You think, oh my God, how young was she? And her life was cut short with no reason whatsoever, just because of the aggressive war. But, we will be eternally grateful to her and to so many others who are doing it now, but also others who we lost. Like there is another friend who I knew, Vera Hirich, who I actually had interview scheduled with her a week before she was killed in Kiev in her apartment. And this is the pain that never leaves all of us.
You're listening to Searching for Heroes. We'll be right back after this. The Ukrainian fixer and producer who was working with us, Sasha Kushanova, she was 21 years old, and she had just been working in television production. But she knew that the best way to help her country was to help the press. And, she lost her life for just that reason, because she wanted to get the story out, and she knew how important it was. And she talked about it quite often. That was her way of fighting the Russians. That was her way of helping her country, was by helping the journalists. And so I feel it. I felt it personally as well. But do you also feel that there is Ukraine is battling the untruths. I mean, we live in a world where there's social media and the Russians are sending so many other stories out. Has that been quite difficult? Have you noticed public opinion abroad change because of incorrect reporting?
Yes, and it actually have been difficult for quite some time. So if we go a little bit back, I remember when I went to school here, I got my master's in Indiana in 1991. When I arrived, I literally, when I answered that I'm from Ukraine, I had to explain in depth where is it and what is it. And the closest question I was getting was like, is that Soviet Union? Is this Russia? Is this? So in general, I think, the world looked at us and our part of the world through the lenses of Soviet propaganda, Russian propaganda, not because people believed necessarily in that, but, when Ukraine was occupied by the Soviet Union, by Russian Empire before that, it's the occupier that tells your story instead of you. Yes, we have very large Ukrainian diaspora here, and they have been trying to spread the information, but it was never easy because, again, Soviet propaganda during Soviet times and Russian worked really well. So that's why in 2022, as you remember, so many people were surprised that actually we did not fold in like 3 days or 3 weeks, that we don't want to be Russians, which was not surprise to us or those who studied our part of the region or who knew Ukraine, because this is our 100 years fight for independence. But it was still surprising because it was not the main narrative. And we're still at the beginning of that curve there are many more Ukrainian studies in American universities now. There are more discussions among think tanks. There are people now uncovering and discovering our Ukrainian movies and Ukrainian books and everything. But so that's the backdrop, which was even before the war started. But after that, of course, Russians pay a lot of attention and a lot of efforts and spend a lot of money to spread lots of disinformation. And again, the only answer to that and the only right way to deal with it is to show the truth, but not by only ourselves. I do it as much as I can, and there are many diplomats that are doing it. But of course, I'm Ukrainian diplomat. I'm biased in that sense. But to have you and your colleagues and people who travel to Ukraine and see it with their own eyes and show it, that I think is the best way to deal with it. Now, it's not going to be easy because, as you said, the social media now, and with all the new capabilities and with all the augmented reality and all the new tools that are becoming available, these are the new challenges, not only for the war in Ukraine in general, but, as on the battlefield, we just have to stay the course. We have to share the truth. We have to do the fact checks. We have to spend time and effort on actually sharing with people. No, this is not right, and this is why. It's hard work, but you just have to do it, and that's what we are focusing on.
And it's not just about reporting what's happening right now, but I suppose, journalists and writers are also documenting war crimes. And I suppose that the longer term is that, somebody has to be held to account in the future, even after the war. And I suppose that that's an important part of all the journalism as well. And is that something that Ukraine is looking ahead to and keeping stock and records of?
It's critical. Every time you hear President Zelensky speak about peace, note that he talks about just and lasting peace. And just is the first word he says. There is no peace without justice. The number of crimes that have been committed. We know sometimes you cannot get what you lost. People who are killed, but justice, regardless of how much time it will take, is inseparable part of healing process. And it has to be done to prevent other dictators to do what Putin is doing in Ukraine. So we actually discussed it right after the beginning of the war. And as you know, our Prosecutor General's office started actually investigating the cases right during the war, not waiting for the war to end, as it happens sometimes, but right there. And we have at the moment 146,000 cases, criminal cases, not only registered in Ukraine, but been actively investigated. And some people are even, some cases are already either in courts or went through courts. And we're cooperating with a lot of people and with American DOJ and many bar associations here in that response, because it's very important for us. Now, there are many more countries who open their own investigations, and we share evidence with them. And there are international different courts. So we will use all system of justice that is available to us. And also, ultimately, the something that we still did not set up, but we are discussing with a number of countries, is the Tribunal for Aggression, because this is the mother of all crime. The fact that Putin and everyone decided to attack Ukraine, that's what started the other war crimes and crimes that happened in Ukraine. But it is very important, and actually documenting it, collecting all the evidence, collecting what people are willing to share. That's also an important element where journalists and civil activists and civil society and psychologists are very important, because sometimes people will not talk to authorities. People are afraid to discuss this or don't want to discuss it with law enforcement, but they will share with people like Victoria, and with others. And this then will become a very important part of our healing process in the future.
Yeah, you mentioned the healing process, and I wonder, so many families, I imagine every family, everyone knows someone whose life has been lost, whose family has been torn apart. And what does healing look like on a sort of personal family level? I mean, this is multi-generational. I don't know how you even look at that for a few generations and how you fix or repair or heal that.
This will take enormous efforts of all of us. Look, right now we're still in the active war phase, and everyone is holding it together because we have the goal to defend ourselves, and that kind of mobilizes everyone. But even now we realize how important the healing process is. So this is, by the way, the initiative that our First Lady is leading, which is called How Are You? And it's a multi-layered initiative. So from teaching people how to help themselves and their families, to really establishing centers where you can go and get that help, to training psychological and professionals, because we will need many more to deal with it, to have special help for the veterans and for the wounded. We have, again, the highest number of people who lost their limbs or who were seriously wounded during this time. So it's going to take a village, as you say, to deal with it. And that's where we really cooperate a lot also with the US, because, you have many capabilities here and with many European countries, but this is going to be, as you said, generational process. How to do it in a way that we find strengths and we keep our resilience, that it will not be turned into, angriness and destruction, but rather into a positive energy, building something much better for the generations to come. And again, in a strange way, that's why, discussing, talking, and planning the reconstruction now is also a tool to address that, because then we all can focus our energy on something that we will create for ourselves. But it's not going to be easy. And I can tell you, on a personal level, it's not easy. You have to deal with it every time and every day. And sometimes you just have to find a way to have it, but also to move forward, to focus on what is important now. Not that it's not important, but how many family members you did not have a chance to say goodbye because of that? My godmom died during the war, not because of the war. Although, of course, I think she would be able to receive much better medical help if it wasn't for the war. But I was here since 2021. I could not see her, and then she died, and she was a very important person for me. She was my godmother. I spent many summers with her, and this is the opportunity that Russians stole from me forever. It's not to mention, people who lost all of their families. Like, we had people at the prayer breakfast recently, and we had Yaroslav Basilevich from Lviv. One day he woke up, and his wife and 3 beautiful daughters one of whom I knew. She was a brilliant student at Ukrainian Catholic University. And he lost all of them. And of course, praying and the fact that Ukrainians are, Christians, and the majority of us believe in God, that helps. But it will require lots of collective efforts in order to be able to deal with it.
Yeah, I remember just a few days before the attack which hit us, speaking to a girl who must have been 8 or 9 years old in hospital, and she had just woken up to find out that her mother had been killed. And I remember that scene as she had just learned that, and thinking about the future and what her life held for her. But one of the most important things about resilience, I suppose, is that when you go through something really difficult, that it doesn't become anger, that it has to become something positive that you can sort of try and build on. That's so hard. I wanted to finish up, Ambassador, if there was a message you wanted to send to the American people, if there was something listening right now, what you want them to know about Ukraine, about what's going on at the moment, and everything else.
I spent 2 years some time ago, as I told you, in Indiana. And what I want to tell to American people, and what I have been telling during my time as an ambassador, there is 9,000 kilometers an ocean between us, but we are closer than we think. We are people who are kind and strong and brave, and both Ukrainian and Americans not only love freedom, but are willing to fight for it. And this is our joint fight. This is about all of us. And I'm sure that, God forbid, if anyone would challenge America, Americans would defend your country, defend their country with everything they have. And this is what we do now. And this is not time to stop. This is not time to change what we were doing. This is the time to double down so that we can actually get to this just and lasting peace and focus on building together, making, reconstructing not just Ukraine, but focusing on economic ties between our countries, in cultural ties, sharing, and building these people-to-people connections that we have started some time ago, and especially during the war, but during the peaceful time. So I just want to say thank you to all American people for enormous support. We really appreciate it. We really value it. And we need that support today more than any time during this war. So I just want to say thank you, and please continue supporting us.
Yeah. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And I hope we get to meet in person one day as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you, Ben, for your personal bravery and commitment, not only in Ukraine, but your whole career, your whole life is amazing testament to what we discussed today. And please continue doing that.
Thank you. I shall. Well, I think it's so important sometimes to go back and listen to Ukrainians, Ambassador herself, talking about Ukraine itself. I think so often the story gets lost when we talk about how many weapons are being sent, what the relationship is between Zelensky and President Trump now speaking to President Putin, and all those are absolutely essential. They are the first and the next steps that have to take place for some kind of peace deal to be reached. But, underneath those few top leaders, you have millions of people who are trying to fight this war, get through this war. And the same is true in every single conflict that I've seen. There are people on the ground trying to keep their cultures intact, try to keep their families intact. And it's an incredible experience covering conflict, because you see so much horror, but you see so much sort of bravery and positivity and resilience as well. And I'm very pleased we got to speak with the ambassador today. And I know that over the next few weeks, I think that soon is when we will see what the next steps will be. But thank you everyone for joining me today, and I look forward to speaking with you next week. Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcasts Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.